The old house in rural Missouri was a ghost of a home, its hallway thick with the dust of months. It was a cold November morning in 1991, and Jacob Wilson, a retired English teacher in his late 60s, gave a large cardboard box a weary push with his foot. For the last 6 months, he had been slowly sifting through his wife's memories, and each box felt like a small final tomb. To Jacob, grief was a process much like grammar. It had to be worked through methodically, even if the rules felt impossibly cruel. This box was different from the others. It was open, filled with small, miscellaneous items. There was an old handwritten notebook, some black and white photographs, and, most oddly, a large, bulky VHS camera. Jacob picked it up. It was heavy, black, and its viewfinder was a tiny square. He flicked the power switch on and saw that an old tape was still inside. He remembered his wife, Laura, had loved this camera. It had captured every moment of their daughter's life, from birth to her first steps. The memory was a heavy weight on his heart. Jacob tried to eject the tape, but it was stuck tight. A sudden compulsive curiosity for the archaic device took hold of him. He carried it to the television, connecting the bulky cables. He paused for a moment before pressing play, a breath caught in his throat. Should he be watching this? He decided with a silent conviction that he should. The television flickered to life, the screen filled with a crackling black and white image. It was their front porch. Laura was sitting there, reading a book and smiling. A soft laugh escaped Jacob's lips, and he felt tears welling up in his eyes. The next scene showed them planting a tree in the garden, Jacob digging with a shovel, and Laura looking at him, laughing. He let out a hearty, choked laugh. He watched her face intently, then his laugh died in his throat. A strange chill ran down his spine. The image on the screen hadn't changed, but her smile was different now, hollow, with a look he had never seen on her face. Her eyes were empty, almost lifeless. The camera then panned slowly toward their bedroom door. The footage was years old, filmed long before her passing, yet the bedroom door in the video was open, revealing a dark, empty space. He looked around the room he was in. The video showed him a truth he could not bear. He saw his own face in the camera's viewfinder, terrified. Then, his wife's lips began to move, though no sound came from the TV. She was saying something to him. He was about to speak, but she put her finger to her lips and the video ended. He quickly turned off the television. The dark room felt cold and damp. He sat on the couch, sweating, his heart pounding in his chest. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the old house. He stared at the blank television screen. The memory of his wife's vacant eyes and distorted smile still burned into his mind. He wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, a faulty tape or a hallucination born of grief, but a cold certainty had settled in his bones. The house felt different now, no longer a quiet refuge, but a living, breathing casket for his memories. He found himself drawn to the camera on the floor. It lay there, black and innocuous, a simple machine. He picked it up, feeling its cold plastic and the weight of the secrets it held. The tape was still inside. With trembling hands, he ejected it. The magnetic ribbon felt slick between his fingers, a silent lie. He rummaged through the box again, searching for another tape, anything to prove this one was a fluke. He found none. Night fell, and with it, a new layer of dread. The wind howled outside, a lonely symphony against the window panes. Jacob sat in his armchair, a book open on his lap, but his eyes were fixed on the television. The stillness of the house was more terrifying than any noise. The old grandfather clock in the hall ticked with a heavy, deliberate rhythm, each beat a hammer blow against his sanity. He couldn't shake the image of his wife in the viewfinder. Her expression, that unnatural smile, had been one of serene malevolence, a look that his loving, kind-hearted Laura would never have had. It was the face of a stranger wearing his wife's skin. He felt a deep-seated fear that wasn't just about a ghost, but about his own understanding of reality. Was this his grief manifesting, or was something truly wrong with the camera? Driven by an irrational need for answers, he reinserted the tape. The VCR whirred to life, a familiar mechanical groan. He pressed play. The footage began again. The garden, the porch, his own laughing face. But this time something was wrong. The image of Laura was clearer, sharper. She wasn't just smiling now, she was looking directly at him, as if through the TV screen, through the years and into his soul. A low, raspy whisper, almost a static buzz, seemed to emanate from the speakers. It was a single, repeated word. Jacob. 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 The voice was his wife's, but hollowed out, drained of all warmth and life. Jacob scrambled for the remote, his fingers clumsy with panic, but the remote was dead. The television and VCR were now a single, unyielding entity, showing him a living nightmare. The camera's lens slowly panned down, revealing a new, disturbing sight. The footage from inside the bedroom, which had been empty before, now showed a blurred figure standing by the door. As the figure slowly turned towards the camera, the static on the screen intensified, and a single, clear image flashed on the screen. A close-up of his own terrified face, from a point of view he couldn't possibly have had. The tape had filmed him as he was watching it. Jacob stumbled backward, tearing the cable from the wall in his panic. The television went black with a final echoing pop. His heart was a frantic, terrified bird, beating against his ribs. He couldn't process what he had seen. The image of his own face on the screen, recorded just moments ago, meant the camera wasn't a relic of the past. It was an active, sinister witness. He scrambled for his keys, his only thought to get out. He had to leave this house, this malevolent tape, and the impossible truth it showed him. He ran to the front door, yanking on the knob, but it was locked. He remembered locking it before he started the tape. A small act of self-imposed solitude. He fumbled with the key, his hands slick with sweat, but the lock wouldn't turn. It felt frozen in place. A low, unsettling whirring sound began to fill the silence. It was coming from the hallway. He looked up, his blood turning to ice. The old VHS camera was floating in the air, its lens aimed directly at him. He could see his own reflection in the lens, a tiny, distorted image of a man consumed by fear. As he stared, a chilling new video began to play on the television screen, though it was now disconnected from the camera. The footage was grainy, but it showed him right where he was, standing by the front door, his face a mask of terror. The tape wasn't just recording him from a distance, it was following him. He could hear the whisper again, louder now. It wasn't coming from the television, but from the camera itself. A voice, hollow and distorted, like it was played through 1,000 years of static, spoke his name. "You came back for me, Jacob." It was Laura's voice, but it was nothing like the voice of the woman he loved. This was the voice of a being that had waited for him, that had prepared this trap. He finally understood. The sadness he felt after her death wasn't just grief, it was a beacon. His grief had called to this thing, whatever it was, and the camera was the lure. He hadn't just found the camera, it had waited for him to find it. The entire house was an elaborate stage, and he was the last actor, playing his part in a scene that would never end. He ran from the door, sprinting into the living room, but the camera silently followed, its lens still trained on him. On the television screen, the footage on the tape began to loop. It showed the old black and white images of him running, of his panicked face. He watched himself on the screen, a terrified man in a room that was no longer his. He realized the loop would never end. He would run forever. The tape was not a record of a ghost. It was a new kind of prison. His reality was now the tape, a final, unexplainable mystery where he was a ghost in his own life, a permanent silent star in a horrifying and endless home video. The hum of Terminal 4 at JFK Airport was a constant, mind-numbing drone. Mark sat with his chin propped in his hand, his eyes scanning the endless sea of red-eye travelers. It was past 3 a.m., and the exhaustion of back-to-back business flights had long ago replaced his coffee-fueled energy. He just wanted his flight to board so he could sink into a window seat and finally sleep. The terminal was a paradox, a crowded loneliness, where thousands of people existed in their own private bubbles of headphones, screens, and hushed conversations. He pulled out his phone, a sleek, cold rectangle in his palm, and saw an old message from his wife, Sarah. "Safe flight, honey. Miss you." A pang of guilt hit him. He'd been so disconnected lately. He typed a quick reply. "Almost home," but the message wouldn't send. He tried again. The small circular icon just spun endlessly. He wasn't surprised. Airport Wi-Fi was notoriously unreliable. He sighed and put the phone back in his pocket. That's when the hum died. It wasn't a slow fade, but an abrupt, total cutoff. The low-frequency rumble of the airport, the chatter from a dozen languages, the soft clatter of luggage wheels, it all vanished in an instant. The silence was absolute. Mark looked up, confused. The large digital flight board above him was still cycling through its list of destinations. The fluorescent lights still blazed overhead, but the thousands of people were frozen. A man in a suit stood mid-stride, his foot suspended in the air. A young girl with a doll was frozen in a fit of laughter, her face a perfect porcelain mask of joy. A couple arguing at a coffee shop were caught mid-gesture, one with a finger raised, the other with an expression of weary defense. The entire terminal had become a photograph. A wave of cold panic washed over Mark. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the tile, a sound so sharp and jarring in the silence it made him wince. He waved his hand in front of the man in the suit. Nothing. He poked the girl's arm. Her skin was cool, like a mannequin. They weren't breathing. There was no rise or fall of chests, no blinking of eyes. He pulled his phone out again, his hands shaking. He had to call someone, anyone. He hit Sarah's contact. The call screen appeared, but instead of ringing, it flashed a single message. Call failed. Reconnecting. He tried to text. The message failed again. Frantically, he scrolled through his contacts, calling one after another. His boss, his sister, a random friend. Every single call failed. Desperate, he tried calling his own number. The call connected instantly. He held the phone to his ear, his mind reeling. From the other end, he heard a sound, the distant, familiar hum of an airport terminal, and then a single voice, clear and cold, echoed back through the receiver. A recording of his own voice from a few minutes ago. "Safe flight, honey. Miss you." Panic surged through Mark's veins, a bitter cold that made his hands tremble. He shoved the phone into his pocket, the sound of his own voice echoing in his ears. It wasn't a recording. It couldn't be. The words, "Safe flight, honey. Miss you," were Sarah's, not his. But the voice had been his own. The impossible was happening, and it was getting worse. He backed away from the frozen passengers, a silent audience of statues. He needed to find an airport employee, security, anyone not trapped in this nightmare. But the security checkpoints were abandoned, the uniformed guards frozen in poses of casual surveillance. The silence was the worst part, a pressure on his eardrums that made him feel like he was screaming internally. He noticed the digital flight board flickered. The letters rearranged themselves, not into new flight information, but into a series of repeating, nonsensical phrases. "No exit." The message flashed, then changed. "No signal." Then again, the finality of it all was terrifying. "You are not." The screen went blank. A low, distorted hiss from the public address system echoed through the terminal. He instinctively looked up, waiting for the crackle of a forgotten flight announcement, but no words came. Just a soft, guttural breathing sound. It was the sound of something in the dark, something unseen and close. He squeezed his eyes shut, wishing he could wake up, wishing for the familiar chaos of the terminal. When he opened them, the digital displays had changed again. This time they didn't show messages. They showed faces. 1,000 faces, all flashing in a rapid, strobing sequence on every single screen in the terminal. The faces of the frozen travelers. And then, his own face appeared. It was a picture of him, standing just now, looking up in terror at the screen. The image was grainy and his eyes were wide, but it was him. Then the next face appeared. It was him again, but with a different suit. The next, a different haircut. Each one was a subtle variation of his own face, a rapid-fire slideshow of 100 different lives he hadn't lived. The breathing over the PA system grew louder, a wet, rattling sound. It was speaking now, but not in words. It was a jumble of sounds, a snippet of Sarah's voice, a few notes of his daughter's laugh, a phrase from an old song he loved, all blended and corrupted, the sound of his life being chewed up and twisted into something horrific. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, trying to make sense of the madness. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A new message. He pulled it out, a desperate hope fluttering in his chest. It was from his wife, Sarah. It read, "Hello, Mark. I'm waiting." He stared at the screen, a new kind of dread settling in. He hadn't been able to send or receive a message for over an hour. This message had come from outside. He looked at the timestamp. It had been sent 3 hours ago, before he even left home. He tried to text back, but his fingers were frozen with fear. He looked back at his phone, his own name on the contact screen. It had been replaced. The contact was now Sarah's husband. Mark's blood ran cold. The message was from Sarah, but it had come from the outside, from the living world. The timestamp was impossibly old, but the words were a direct response to his plight. He looked up from his phone, a new understanding dawning on him, a horrifying clarity. He heard a low, cracking sound. The man in the suit, frozen mid-stride, moved. It wasn't a sudden awakening. It was a slow, mechanical twitch, like a puppet on a string. His head turned to face Mark, but his eyes remained empty, locked in the same frozen stare. The woman with the raised finger at the coffee stand and the girl with the doll all shifted, a slow, unnatural collective movement. Their feet dragged against the polished floor, making a sound like sandpaper on concrete. They were not frozen. They were waiting. The PA system crackled again, and a voice, not the distorted one from before, but a calm, female voice, like a GPS narrator, spoke. "Please proceed to the exit, Mark." The voice was coming from everywhere at once, resonating through the terminal's silent air. "Your replacement has been processed." Mark stumbled backward, tripping over a suitcase that had not been there moments before. He was no longer the traveler. He was the anomaly, the one who was meant to be phased out. He looked at his phone again, his eyes locking on his own contact name. Sarah's husband. The terror of the past hour had been a final test, a system error check. He had failed. He was a faulty product being recalled. The frozen figures of the travelers began to close in, their movements still slow and jerky. They were no longer people. Their forms blurred and shifted, their faces becoming the hundreds of variations of his own that he had seen on the screens. He was looking at himself, over and over, in a terrifying gallery of failures. He was a Mark who hadn't made it, a flawed version of a person who was meant to be in a life he now understood was never truly his. He ran. He sprinted through the silent aisles, past the abandoned check-in desks and the motionless luggage belts. The figures of the travelers shuffled behind him, their scraping feet a relentless, growing sound. He saw an exit door ahead, a sliver of hope. He burst through the glass doors, the cold night air hitting his face. He was outside on the airport curb under a dark, starless sky. A black car idled at the curb. The back door opened. A man was sitting inside, impeccably dressed. He had a familiar face, a face Mark knew from 1,000 mirrors. It was his own face, but with a calm, assured smile that Mark had never been able to master. "You're not needed anymore," the man said. His voice was not an echo or a distortion. It was Mark's voice, the one he had heard on the phone, They have me now. I'm ready to take your place. Mark felt a sudden, sharp jolt run through his body. His vision blurred, and the world began to flicker. He was no longer a person. He was a video on a screen, a memory on a hard drive, a sequence of data waiting to be erased. He was a fleeting flicker of light, and the man in the car was the perfect, permanent version. As his consciousness began to fade, the last thing he saw was his own reflection in the car's window, his eyes vacant and his lips twisting into a silent, satisfied smile. His body was now ready for its next passenger. The old beat-up Volvo was a tin can hurtling through a vast, star-peppered canvas of a California desert night. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale road snacks and the ghosts of inside jokes. Dave, the self-appointed navigator, tapped his fingers on the worn map spread over his knees. He was the one who kept the peace, the one who laughed a little too loudly to fill the silences. In the passenger seat, his friend Liam stared out the window, a silent statue against the rushing dark. In the back, Chloe, a whirlwind of vibrant hair and impulsive energy, was humming along to a song on the radio. Next to her, Sarah was curled against the window, her expression tight and guarded. The four of them were a constellation of old friendships and unspoken truths, bound together by 1,000 miles of asphalt and a shared silent history. Their good mood evaporated with a sudden, sharp jerk. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died with a final defeated shudder. The radio cut to silence. Dave turned the key, but all he got was a hollow click. "Damn it," he muttered, pushing on the steering wheel in frustration. "What was that?" Chloe asked, her humming replaced by a nervous laugh. Liam just pointed forward, a single finger against the pitch-black horizon. They were on a long, straight stretch of Highway 62, and the nearest light was miles away. No cars, no signs, just an unending road framed by skeletal Joshua trees. They all reached for their phones, a collective, automated response. But there was no signal, no bars, just the tiny red no service icon that felt like a death sentence. "No, no, no," Sarah whispered, her face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. "My parents are expecting me to check in." Dave tried to play it off. "It's fine. We'll just walk a little. Someone's got to pass us eventually." But then, a new sound came. It was a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to hang just outside the car. It was too soft to be wind, too clear to be an echo. It was just a breath of sound. It was Liam's voice. They all looked at him confused, but he was staring out the window, his expression unreadable. "I didn't say anything," he said, his voice flat. The whispering came again. It was Chloe's voice this time, laced with a familiar note of frustration. "Don't you ever listen?" The words hung in the air, a sharp accusation. Chloe's eyes went wide. "That wasn't me, I swear." The car filled with a cold tension that had nothing to do with the desert night. The whispering returned, and this time it was Dave's voice, his own words from years ago, distorted by a lifetime of memory. "I'm sorry, but I can't tell you everything." The voice was a ghost of a conversation, a memory that belonged only to him and Sarah. He looked at her, his face frozen with fear, a silent plea in his eyes. He saw the same fear reflected back in hers. The whispered truths were not coming from their mouths. They were coming from the dark outside. The silence was a thick, suffocating blanket, punctuated only by the nervous breathing of the four friends. No one spoke for a long moment, not wanting to give the darkness outside another voice to borrow. Dave stared at Sarah, a silent, terrified question in his eyes. The whispered truth from the darkness, his promise to keep her secret, was now out in the open. But what secret was it? He didn't know. Her face was pale, and she looked at him with a betrayal he didn't understand. Liam was the first to break the tension, his quiet demeanor shattered. "What was that, man? What are you hiding from her?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion as he looked at Dave. "I'm not hiding anything from anyone," Dave shot back, the strain of keeping the peace finally gone. "Something out there is using our voices. The whispering returned, and this time, it was Liam's voice. A low, bitter murmur filled the car's interior. "They think I'm so quiet, so dependable. They don't know I lied to everyone to get on this trip." The words hung in the air, a confession no one had asked for. Chloe gasped and looked at him. Liam's jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the empty road. The creature had just exposed his deepest insecurity. The whispers grew bolder, the voices overlapping. A chorus of their own corrupted words filled the air, each one a sharp, cruel barb. Chloe's voice confessed a forgotten betrayal. "It was me. I'm the reason the last trip got canceled." And Sarah's, a desperate, tearful whisper, spoke of a lie so profound it made everyone in the car flinch. "I'm not on my way home to see my parents. I ran away from my engagement." The horror had moved inside the car. They were no longer fighting an unseen entity outside. They were fighting themselves. They glared at each other, the easy comfort of their friendship melting away into suspicion and hostility. Dave realized the monster wasn't using their secrets to threaten them. It was using them to destroy them from the inside out. He had to do something, anything, to stop the whispers. He fumbled with the car door handle. It was unlocked. "I'm going to get help," he yelled, but no one seemed to hear him. Their eyes were locked on each other, filled with a raw hurt and anger he hadn't seen in years. He ran from the car, leaving the group to their own terrifying truths. A coward fleeing a battle he couldn't win. He ran down the long, empty road, the dust of the desert kicking up around his feet. The whispers followed him, but they were different now. They were a single, unified voice, a chorus of all his friends' cruelest secrets, and one truth he had always kept to himself, a lie he had told to everyone. He ran until he couldn't breathe, until his lungs burned and his legs screamed. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices from the darkness, a choir of betrayal. He finally collapsed to his knees, his mind reeling. He had to stop this, had to confess to the secrets he had kept for so long. He looked up at the moon, his breath ragged, ready to say everything. And that's when he saw it. The car was gone. The empty road stretched in both directions, completely desolate, as if there had never been a car or friends or a conversation at all. He was alone, and the whispers, 100 voices from the dark, were now all his own, a chorus of every lie he had ever told. He had been so focused on saving his friends from the whispers that he hadn't noticed that the whispers had already erased them from existence. Dave knelt on the asphalt, his mind a howling void. His friends, they were gone. No, not gone. They were never there. The car was never there. The road was empty, stretching into a desolate moonlit silence in both directions. The whispers were all that remained, and they had changed. They were no longer the accusations of Liam, Chloe, or Sarah. They were his. 100 hushed voices, all speaking his own secret truths. "I am sorry. I have to lie to keep everyone together. I can't tell them what I really feel, they wouldn't understand. I don't know who I am without them." The whispers swirled around him, a chorus of his own quiet deceptions, each one a thread that had woven the fabric of their friendship. And he realized the horrifying truth. The monster wasn't a creature in the dark, and it wasn't a ghost. It was the collective weight of their lies. It had fed on their unspoken truths, becoming stronger with every half-truth and hidden regret. And when the car broke down, it had come to feast. Dave's desperate run from the car wasn't a flight from a monster. It was an act of purging. He had been so focused on saving his friends that he hadn't noticed that every step he took, every whispered lie that was exposed, had unraveled them from existence. The entity wasn't a destructive force. It was a force of horrifying honesty. It didn't consume them with violence. It simply revealed their lies, and as their deceptions dissolved, so did they. He sat on the blacktop, the desert wind a cold hand on his skin. He was truly alone. All the easy laughter, the shared memories, the quiet glances, They had been built on a foundation of lies, and now that the foundation was gone, so were they. He was the last one standing because his lies, the lies he had told to maintain the illusion of friendship, were the strongest. The whispers fell silent and a new sound filled the air. It was a single long sigh, coming from the blackness ahead. The sound was not of a person, but of a vast, unburdened emptiness, as if something had just finished a long, satisfying meal. Dave stared into the night, his mind a hollowed-out ruin. His friends had not been taken. They had been erased. Their stories had been deleted. Their existence wiped clean. The price of his survival was a solitude so profound it felt like a final, endless death. He was a man who had lied his friends out of existence. He was a survivor of a truth so absolute, it had left him with nothing but a silent road, and the terrible, lingering knowledge that his lies, his desperate attempts at friendship were the most dangerous things in the world. He was the only one left to remember them.